the bridge, but what happened when the HIMARS hit the bridge? There was a Russian convoy traveling across it. Now, you only get that kind of luck if you have folks on the ground, as Chuck Farrell likes to say, patriots promoted to partisans, and they tell you now is the time. And that happened earlier tonight.
Alan, if you want to know what HIMARS under a tarp looks like, it's in the nest.
Okay, I'm going to take a look. Thank you. And this photograph, this video is only posted because these HIMARS were in this place 6 months ago. They're not there anymore.
Correct. And actually, now that I'm looking at the photo, I was able to take a picture because we were stuck in a traffic jam because some idiot didn't know how to drive on ice.
Not you.
No, not me. I was doing fine that day.
So, speaking about ice brings us to weather. And I looked at the weather across Ukraine today. It's still hovering around freezing here at the end of January. It's much warmer in Odessa. It's relatively warm in Kherson, but it's about -1, 0 degrees Celsius, +2, +3, +4 Celsius. So that's around freezing, or 36 degrees if Americans are listening and need to convert to Fahrenheit. This is a pretty warm winter. And I mean, Ryan can tell us about driving through Ukraine. It's the kind of winter you might encounter in a place like New Jersey. It's not snow, it's not rain, it's not sleet. It's just the worst kind of mixed precipitation. Is that what you drove through?
I drove through every kind of weather and precipitation you could imagine in Ukraine. I was actually kind of surprised at how diverse the weather patterns are in a country that's roughly the size of Texas. You could drive through snowy conditions and then foggy conditions and then rain and then back to clear skies and back to snow before you made it to Poland.
Well, it sounds a lot like New England. Mark Twain once said about New England weather, if you don't like the weather, just wait a minute, by which he meant it would change. And it changes in Ukraine a lot. But we haven't seen the freezing weather that we might have expected. I guess this is a plus and a minus. In terms of the battlefield, it's a minus for the Ukrainians. It seems to me, I don't really know. We'd have to wait for the military experts to weigh in here. In Western Europe, warm temperatures are a plus because the cost of natural gas, for example, is actually below what it was a year ago, which is amazing. So, folks, we're just past the top of the hour here. Please retweet this space, MriyaReport. Go to the website, MriyaReport.org. If you don't want to listen here on Twitter, you can if you listen here on Twitter on your phone, you can raise your hand, come up as a speaker. But you can also listen on your laptop just by going to MriyaReport.org. You can only listen there. You can't raise your hand and join us as a speaker, but you can hear what we're talking about. You can also go to MriyaAid.org and see what a contribution can accomplish. in terms of sending life-saving supplies to Ukraine. So please do retweet this space. As Ryan mentioned, it is almost sunrise in Ukraine right about now. And we'll be bringing you news from Ukraine. And also, we will continue to take a look at what is happening in Iran. Why are we interested in what is happening in Iran? Because the factories there that apparently have been struck and possibly destroyed were making munitions that would be sent to Russia. Those munitions would kill Ukrainians, very simply put. These are Shahed drones, these are ballistic missiles, these are artillery shells, all of which Russia uses in its genocidal terror launched every single day against Ukraine. So please retweet this space. And as you do, you can welcome up Anda. Anda, welcome. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Alan. Good morning, Michelle. Nice to see you too. You have had a very long shift today. I think every day this week you have put in like a full work day, isn't it, Alan?
It's not work, Anda, as you know. Uh, it's a pleasure to be here at MriyaReport. This is just never work.
How is that saying with the gift that keeps on giving, something like that?
Yes, MriyaReport is the gift that keeps on giving, and it is also the gift that keeps on requesting. Can you be here? What time? Uh, and but you know, and you have been here hours and hours and hours, and you know, I know also, although you would not want everyone here to know it. You've been here when you've been under the weather, when you've had a cold, and that is pushing through to do everything you can do.
Well, I am still under medication and still coughing from time to time. But I will see the pneumologist tomorrow, so that's good. What can you do? You know, I once told someone who asked me why, and I told him that my brain still works, so does my mouth. So I can still talk, and as long as I can still talk, it's good. When I tell you I cannot speak, that's not good. That's when something is not good with me. But well, I was looking. Sorry.
Don't lose your voice, Anda, please, because your voice is too important. You know, keep putting honey in your tea. I hope you're doing that. Please do not lose your voice. Go ahead.
Actually, do that. You reminded me of that first day last week to have some tea with honey, and I did that, and it actually helped. So, thank you. I forgot about that, and I do have honey in the house. So, yeah, I followed your advice. Actually, you need to know that. And I ate like two boxes of how do you call them? There are tiny pills for throat. For
Lozenges?
They prevent you getting laryngitis and other problems with the neck, with your throat, especially when you talk and you're during a cold.
What type
Anyway,
of problems?
Ricola.
It could be Ricola, it could be secrets. The generic term is lozenges, Lozenges. But again, honey and tea should take care of that as well. And you know, gargle. Even just a little warm water in the morning. It can make a difference.
I was going to suggest the same thing, Alan. Sometimes I find when I have a sore throat, I'll gargle with salt water, and that's really helpful.
Well, and you are
Could just not get sick.
So please continue. Are you bringing us news tonight as you come up? Because I know you are one of the best news watchers here. If I miss something, if Michelle or any of the co-hosts miss something, you've seen it and you bring it to us.
well, at least I try. I was wondering. So I was looking at what was hit yesterday. I understand from you, and I saw some footages of that convoy, and I guess Chuck, which actually is a SEAL. So he if I read enough about paratroopers and yeah, it was not an accident. Let's put it this way: if they hit a convoy, sorry.
Excuse me, Kazim. If you have a question, raise your hand, and I will mute you until you do raise your hand, and then call on you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, I have a question, sir.
Well, so Kazim, this is how we do things here at MriyaReport.
Yes,
You
I'm a
can
student at
nope,
PhD.
nope, Kazim. Wait 1 second, please.
Okay.
Yep, you look at the bottom of your phone screen, tap the heart plus icon, and then tap the hand that raises your hand to ask a question, and then we'll call on you. But right now, we're speaking to Anda, and when we're finished with Anda, we will come back and take your question. Okay. Thank you very much. Anda, go ahead. Kazim, if you can't raise your hand, I'm just going to mute you. Thank you. Anda?
All right. So I was looking also in the south. One interesting piece of news that was reported was about two vessels. So in Kherson port, to be more exact, there were two foreign vessels, and they were hit by Russian missiles. And basically the one of the Russian projectiles pierced through the hull, and some fuel from the storage area leaked into the Dnieper. This is actually not so today we are on the 30th. The hit was on the 24th. I learned about the hit. The vessel, it's a Turkish one. It's called Tuzla. And actually, I learned about the hit on the 24th, 25th, but I didn't know it leaked oil. Apparently, in the meantime, they managed to seal and fix it, and there is no environmental damage or something. But one thing I haven't seen, and I don't know where to look for that information, is if the Turkish authorities reacted to this. So I haven't seen any response whatsoever regarding the fact that one Turkish vessel was hit. Usually, when the property of another country is hit, even if it's a war zone, some reaction is issued. So I was really looking forward for that and haven't seen that. So
And I've been looking for the Turkish response as well, and I have not seen one. And was it just one Turkish ship, or was it two? And I believe at least one burned, but I haven't. I've seen no response from Turkey.
I haven't seen any footage of it burn. It's so the reports as until now, it's just Tuzla, which we know it's Turkish, and a bulk carrier, but the name was not mentioned, so I don't know, and I don't want to speculate. And then I didn't see. So I saw video with the oil in the water. I haven't seen any footage with fire. It was something on Tuzla, I think, on the 26th, but that was it. So I suppose it was something localized, and it's contained. I don't know if
I'm not sure either, Anda. But please continue.
Basically, this was it on this one. To be completely fair, Alan, sometimes they give you bits and pieces. So especially when you don't have the possibility of going there and call, and I don't have OSINT capabilities to geolocate and verify every location. What remains for me is to look around and to search for various sources otherwise, right? So search for multiple different sources and multiple different opinions. So that's why I'm pretty reserved on this one. I know I saw some pictures, actually, not even video at that time with Tuzla burning, but I guess it was something localized because later on it wasn't reported that it was heavily damaged or something, or at least I haven't seen reports. Maybe there are, and I just missed them. So basically this is it for this. But you know, Alan, I was looking at our panel, and I see that we have Ray up, and I haven't seen Ray in a month. I don't know. I don't remember. And I have to say this. I'm really happy he is here. We have had during some mornings for me, and I guess evenings for him, some interesting discussions on aviation and on missiles and whatnot. So I just wanted to mention this too. All right. I don't know what, how you want to how you want us to go further if you want. So I can give you in short what was hit last in the last 24 hours. So actually this night there was a hit on Kharkiv with an S-300. Dnipropetrovsk region, Nikopol was again under fire. They were under fire and hit yesterday. So on the 28th also. In Luhansk, there is one interesting piece of news that Russian authorities are forcing people to leave the villages and towns near the front line. And I'm actually worried that they are sending them through filtration camps to Russia. So using this as an excuse to send them to concentration camps, basically. What else had happened yesterday? There were servicemen. So there were servicemen, Ukrainian servicemen, reported to arrive in UK to train on the Challengers. What else? And there were some strikes on Russian positions from Ukraine air forces. Actually, they hit some anti-aircraft missile systems and concentration. So areas where there were. Sorry, my phone is dying. Let me just 1 second.
Oh,
All
okay.
right.
Yeah.
I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay.
Okay. Good.
Okay. So basically, Ukraine managed to hit some rocket and artillery forces and two enemy radar stations. So it was pretty good. It was pretty good. When you see the reports, sometimes they are pretty daunting because you see Russia hit this, and you only see a couple of reports on what Ukraine hit back, but usually they are on point, and when they hit, they destroy. They destroy the military positions they are aiming for. So they are not hitting randomly civilian compounds or hospitals or I don't know, schools like Russia does. In the last month, I have seen at least 6 reports on Russian schools or kindergartens being hit, which is absurd. So yeah, basically this would be in a gist, excluding the convoy. So excluding the convoy, this would be in the gist what happened yesterday. Not much.
Not much, but something happens every day. We don't always hear about it every day. Sometimes we don't hear about it the next day or for days. But we do know that Ukraine is actively striking behind the lines and taking out Russian depots, control centers, command centers, and as Anda just mentioned, taking out Russian supply convoys, thanks to information provided by Ukrainian partisans behind the lines. And this makes a huge difference because it means that supplies are not getting to the front line where Russia needs them to continue artillery strikes, especially like the artillery shelling they conducted against Kharkiv tonight. And I think we are moving toward a co-host swap in a short time, and you'll be coming up with your tea and honey, and I hope it's tea and honey, not coffee. If it's caffeinated tea, it can do almost the same job as coffee. And if it's caffeinated tea and honey, then your voice will be smooth, and you'll be with us in the early morning hours here. So Michelle will be with you for a while, and I think Ryan will be up with you for a while. But behind the scenes, we will orchestrate this co-host swap. I'll be here for just a few more minutes, I think.
All right. So let's do this, and I will take advantage of having Ray here, because he's a military and I but still, and I have I actually have a question, because I read something. It's not news on the front lines per se, but it's interesting nonetheless. So the news states that 5 Russian men fleeing military conscription. So we knew they do that last year in September. Are living right now in South Korean airport in Seoul. So they fled, right, in late September, arrived in October. 3 of them arrived in October, and 2 of them arrived in November. So they applied for refugee status, but they were denied. So they were stranded at the departure area while awaiting a ruling on their appeal. And I have a couple of questions on that. Besides the fact that this is such a Tom Hanks terminal story. I don't know if they mopped the floor to get some money, or I don't know. But I was wondering 3 things. One, if you have encountered, Ray, in your experience, people to avoid being conscripted, or how should I put this? Do everything or anything in order not to get conscripted, not to get on the front lines. So basically pushing this availability that they are supposed to have away to the extreme? So that would be my first question.
Maybe I should quickly answer. I think Alan and I are probably from the generation who recall the Vietnam draft and the draft dodgers who went to such lengths like fleeing to Canada in order to avoid the U.S. draft. That was a very unpopular war. So I can imagine the same thing happening with our poor Russian friends.
Ray, we are from the same generation. I do think it's a little different. Uh, uh, my brother's best friend, uh, actually, and he had a low number in the draft, and so that meant he would be called up to and would most likely go to Vietnam to fight. So my brother's best friend shot off his big toe, the big toe on his left foot, so that he would not be able to be drafted. And one of my friends went to Canada so that he would not be drafted. I honestly, in retrospect, I don't regard um, either of these people as draft dodgers. You know, if you disable yourself, and I know that there have been stories about Russians disabling themselves so that they will not be drafted and become Mobics and sent to almost certain death in Ukraine. But when Steve shot off his big toe with a shotgun, um, it was a last resort. There was nothing else that he could do. Um, but it was an expression of desperation, but it was also an expression of opposition. And Steve had burned his draft card. I had burned my draft card. We had marched in Washington D.C. against the war. Um, it is a very confusing situation to be in when you're a young man. I mean, you're 18 or you're 19 or you're 20, and you are looking at the possibility of your life ending relatively soon. In a free country, you can protest. Here, we marched, we burned our draft cards. Uh, we did a lot more than that. I also have friends who did serve in Vietnam. My cousin served in Vietnam as a tank commander and was awarded a medal. I have a friend who was in the Navy in Vietnam in command of a hospital ship, and he came back to the United States and was active in Veterans for Peace. But again, this is because we live in a free country where even in the midst of war and in the middle of a military draft, we can make a statement. Even making that statement changes our lives. You know, Ray, I've gone on a little bit. This is not the current situation in Russia. It doesn't even begin to resemble what happened in the United States in the 1960s. It doesn't even come close. Ray, what was your experience? Because we are of the same generation.
I wasn't in the U.S. I'm actually originally from the Far East, and in Taiwan, there were people who avoided military service for health reasons. And one of the things because partly you know, it was disruptive to life, even though there was a threat from China, and there were people who would get a genetic test for the HLA-B27 genetic marker for ankylosing spondylitis. And just having the marker, even if you don't have the disease itself manifesting, that was a way to avoid having to go in at that point. I think it was 2 years of national service. So yeah, at that time, I believe there was still martial law in Taiwan, and yeah, people go to certain lengths to avoid military service, and it seems to be a natural thing. But I do believe if there was an existential threat to any of these countries, that when a war is popular and considered a just war, as, as some of us who are a little bit more religiously minded, the Augsburg Confession of a definition of a just war, then it is one's duty to go and serve. So that's yeah. I never had to deal with a draft. So
Yeah,
never
you
had to
hopeless
make that
piece of
choice.
fucking shit. All you Americans are fucking hopeless piece of shit that cause.
Well, he
Yeah,
seems pleasant.
sorry about that, Ray. That person has been removed from the speakers panel because you just cannot come up here and be that discourteous. So he will not be coming back. Ray, the other thing I was going to say is that in terms of a just war, this is what we are looking at in Ukraine right now. Of course, Ukrainians fighting this war, volunteers from around the world going to Ukraine to fight in this war are fighting in a just war. And when there is an unjust war being waged, there are those who will take steps to save you from this fate. One of my oldest friends, I was in high school with him. I went through college with him. He was a football player. He was an athlete. He was a great fit guy. He was called up, and when he went to his physical exam, the examining doctor said, "Well, Vince, you have a hernia. I can't accept you into Army service." And he says, "What? Does that mean I can't play football?" And the doctor says, "No, it means you're not going to Vietnam." Uh, um, so there are just hundreds and hundreds, thousands of stories like this of saving people from an experience that was not necessary. This was more than this is more than 5 years ago. But right now in Ukraine, the situation is different. It's much different.
Sorry.
And
Yeah. Sorry. Indeed, it's different. I was asking because I don't know how to put this. Looking at this piece of news, this is why I was asking. Swear to God, when I was looking at this piece of news. So in my family, on both sides, I have people who have served, volunteered to serve. I have from couple of generals to some surgeons, depending depending who where arrived on the um, as a military rank until they left the army. So it's very very hard for me to understand. Being raised like this, like you have your family which you protect, you and after that, after the family, you have your country. So it's this is why I asked, because for me, every time I hear someone, I do understand the process. So what are they doing? And I can understand that people are going against the flow, right? And as you said, Alan, sorry, you at some point you probably also because you were born in a free country, and it's not only the fact that you are born in a free country, it's the culture around you. So the culture in which you are born, which actually allows you and encourages you to speak up your mind and to put out there what you believe, right? It allows you to basically push back when you think something's wrong inside the country. So you don't have to flee the country to push back. So I understand that, but I wanted to understand more the mechanism behind, because as I told you, from my point of view, it's something that it's. I think I mentioned here. I don't know if you were. I think you already went to bed at that point. If I would have been in Russia, and a war was going on, I don't think I could have gone outside Russia and join another country to fight my own. I don't think I could have done that. I don't think I could have had that in me. Even if I would think that my country is doing wrong, I would probably join the partisans in my country, and they would fight from within. You know, I don't know if this makes sense, but for me, that's another point. Looking at the Russian battalion, I understand them, I support them. Not understand. That's exactly it. I don't understand them. I support them. I admire them for their courage and for their stance, but I don't understand them. I don't know if this makes sense. I don't know. It's such a strange thing when I look at this, and I don't know if it makes any sense for you.
And it makes all the sense in the world, because it tells us what a complex situation this is for any individual, and it all comes down to the individual. And as much as I like to think I would know what I would have done in 1938 or 1939 or 1940, when my father, for example, went to war, I don't know what I would have done. I guess in 1940 I would have gone to war too, but not in 1968, not in 1967. The world changed, and America was fighting a different kind of war. I will also go so far as to say I have Russian friends who left the country, uh, and more than 1 million Russians have left the country to avoid the draft. What if they had stayed and joined together and gone out on the streets in Moscow and St. Petersburg and demonstrated just as the Iranian citizens have demonstrated in Tehran now, you know, shouting down their regime. Every single Russian who left, had they stayed and joined together, might have made a difference. But any single Russian laying a flower at a monument in St. Petersburg or Russia and getting arrested is just one voice. And it is so easy for a dictatorship like Putin's dictatorship to silence one voice and another voice, one at a time. People need to act together in thousands and tens of thousands and in millions. It's the only way. It is just the only way to bring freedom to countries and to use freedom for ourselves. It's the only way. I've gone on. I apologize. Ray, your hand is up. Please go ahead. And very soon I'm going to drop down and shut up, as I should. Ray.
No, but thanks for sharing your firsthand experience. And I think as just to address Anda's point about this being conflicted about what to do in a difficult and a complex situation, I think sometimes people can be too sure of themselves without life experiences. And I would admit that when I was much younger, these things were much easier. Some rightly so, and some I've changed my mind about, as I think people should do when they have more experience. When I was younger, I thought that North Vietnam was invading South Vietnam. I felt that people should do their duty and help a invaded friend. But then when you look at the complexity of what was going on in the U.S. and how the war powers act, and how the rights of or actually the powers of a president to wage war without Congress approval and things like that, that I understood better why the war was felt to be unjust, and the draft, well, actually the draft being not proper, in that if you're going to have a war, you should have a democratic process of debating whether the United States should be intervening, and not just having a president deciding to just go to war. I have learned that yes, politics can be complicated, can be difficult. But then when it came to sort of the Cold War, when we realized that it really was an existential threat, and that the world could end, or our way of life could end, if the Russians came charging through or the Red Army come charging through the Fulda Gap, and that was very clear. That was something that I was wholeheartedly supporting, and had the penny dropped, and we had to go and serve, I would have quite happily served in the I guess I would have been called into the Royal Army Medical Corps. So it was something that was very clear to me, that that would be a just war, but Vietnam, perhaps in the eyes of Americans, would not. So I hope that that perspective is helpful to Anda. I also have a lot of Russian friends and colleagues, and in fact, quite a few had not returned to Russia because it was they were opposed to the war. And yeah, I'm going on a bit too, but I think I need to bring some perspective to what Alan was saying about, you know, staying and fighting. If you remember, in 2019, the people of Hong Kong came out in force to protest a non-democratically imposed legislation, and the protests were about as vigorous as they could be to try and change the mind of a government that was supposed to be representative. Hong Kong was supposed to be, you know, different from autocratic China. There should be representative government, but as you saw, the communists are very good at doing what they did. They imposed a national security law, went out and arrested people, and basically dismantled by force the protest movement. So I think while yes, I agree that if people stayed and fight, that would have been preferable. But you know, everybody has to make their individual decisions, and the authorities with a authoritarian regime tends to have things like the secret police and people to spy on their own people. That makes it extremely difficult unless the populace is very well organized. And unfortunately, when you have a very capable secret police and FSB in Russia, that becomes very difficult. And I guess it would have been very risky for a lot of people to try and resist. So I don't begrudge people sort of taking the easier way out and still resist by leaving. Just my 2 cents.
More than 2 cents, right? I mean, leaving your country and also possibly never returning is a kind of resistance. And so it means you are removing yourself not just from your culture and from your home, but it means you're going to contribute your talents and your future and your energy to some other community in the world. So Russians who leave Russia because they oppose this war, Russia is losing out. They're losing talent. They are losing their future. And it's because they launched this senseless genocidal war. They might be trying to take away the future of Ukraine, but at the same time, they are losing their own future. They are losing every talented Russian who will be worth anything in 20 or 30 years. At least that is my hope. I hope that these young Russians who have left the country will never return. The ones I know will never return to Russia. And this means that Russia will become a hollow society without talent, without ingenuity, without curiosity, without inquisitiveness. And this is going to destroy that country. I'm going to drop down as co-host. I've been here for a while. Anda is going to come up, and she can carry on much better than I can. Thank you all for being here through the day and night. Please retweet MriyaReport. Please go to mariaaid.org. Please make a contribution tonight if you can. It makes a difference. And with that, Slava Ukraini. And thank you all so much. Good night.
Heroin Slava. Good night.
Thank you.
Heroin slava.
Thank you so much, Alan. You put in a really long stint today. I think it was 8 or 9 hours. So thank you. We appreciate you. And it's always a pleasure to co-host with you. So Anda will be coming up in a couple of minutes. It's been a long time since we've had girls' night, so I'm looking forward to that. And in the meantime, we have a hand up from Helsinki.
Yeah, I'm absolutely already crashing your girls' night, so I'm sorry about that, but I have to go to the office, so then you can have your girls' night. Yeah, I wanted to say something what Ray said, push back a little bit about the character. These people who left Russia, they left because they wanted to save their own ass. There was just a few, this kind of tiny minority of this kind of hipsters and so-called liberals who left immediately. And things go on as usual there in Moscow. People want to forget the war completely, if you read the reports, that they want to pretend that this thing doesn't exist, that their government is not raping and murdering and killing fellow neighboring country people, their women and children and everybody, torturing. So this is the reality. They are extremely cynical people, extremely passive people. They are not rising up for anything, and they can take a beating very hardly before they so just to be a little bit stereotypical about Russians, they don't believe that they have agency, because we who have born in the free world, we have this fundamental belief that we have freedom and we have actually means to influence our own future. But I think generally Russians, they don't have this kind of thing, and if something bad happens, they are not going to rise up. So they have plenty of opportunities to rise up. For example, the most marked point for uprising for these so-called liberals, who are, by the way, very kind of pro-Russian imperial people, I regrettably find that they are like this. They are not willing to let go of the imperial mentality that they have inherited from their nomenclatura, their parents who have been in high positions in Russian Soviet hierarchy. So they had the chance when Putin came with power after Medvedev, but they didn't. They are just they want somebody else to do it for them. They don't want to do it themselves. So it's extremely disappointing that these people, then if they come to the West, you should read what the extremely intelligent and capable man who has become the president of Czechia, Czech Republic, how is the official name? He wrote about this, that these people didn't go and leave their country because they wanted to save Ukraine. They just left because, oh my God, this is going to affect me actually, because they will not move. They are like, I'm sorry to say, but they are like slaves in a, how do you say, where you keep animals. They are kept in a cage, and if nobody rattles their cage, they're happy to stay where they are. So it is extremely disappointing people, I have to say. Even the so-called liberals, they are just virtue signaling, crying about Navalny. Who cares about Navalny? Who cares about this opposition who never did anything for anybody except crying out things, and Ukrainians being killed. So this is the thing, they don't talk enough about Ukrainian suffering. They talk about how their life is miserable in Latvia and this kind of thing when TV Rain is closed down and this kind of thing. So extremely disappointing. They don't believe, they're like the Chinese, they don't believe that they don't believe in freedom. They are not born free and they don't believe in freedom. It's the same phenomenon if I talk to Chinese who are highly educated, even might be exposed to Western culture for years and years, but they don't see freedom. They see freedom as they fear freedom, because freedom for them means chaos. They have completely different mindset, and I'm not very optimistic that we can change. The Western democracy, Western freedom is not an expert product. It has to be born in within, and we in the West, we have completely failed to kind of convince these people that they should, out of their own interest, support freedom and democracy. So I think this is the kind of, we have to be realistic. Look at these countries as they are and not as we would wish they would be. And really this war in Ukraine has kind of exposed the true face of Russia completely without any masquerade, because these people are expert in all kind of masquerades and making great show about great empire and all this kind of nonsensical Potemkin's charade. But now we see exactly the ugly face of Russia now, how it is really. So that is the kind of sad truth. Thanks.
You made a lot of really good points, Helsinki, and you're absolutely right. When we saw a lot of young men from Russia leave pretty early on, and they weren't leaving because they were patriotic to their own country, they were leaving because they were scared of dying. So it's very different from a lot of other situations. And you're welcome to join our Ladies' Night anytime, where we welcome everybody. So you're always welcome here. And go ahead, Ray.
Well, I would agree with a lot of what was said, but at the same time, I do have a different perspective, and sometimes, we we got to be careful about like lumping everybody together, as Helsinki was saying, maybe stereotyping uh, a particular country. And at one point I thought I was making a comment about the lone protester going out and then being arrested. And I, not having followed what had happened in Russia so closely, I thought, well, they probably should have done what the Chinese did, and they held up blank pieces of paper, and there's still a law. You can't arrest somebody for holding up a blank piece of paper. You may be arrested for saying something, expressing something, but not a blank piece of paper. Then I was, quite convincingly reminded that the the blank paper protest did not originate from the Chinese, even though I thought, the Hong Kong folks are always, thinking up these things, and probably they thought it up. It was actually the Russians. Early on in the anti-war protests, there were people holding up blank pieces of paper, and I think the Russians, probably the FSB and the security apparatus, was probably more brutal and more non-law abiding than the Chinese communist. And the people holding up the blank pieces of paper were arrested and treated just as badly. So I think we have to be careful. Yes, overall, I agree. There's probably a lot of people who were not brought up on the principles of democracy and freedom, and that there will be a greater proportion who would tend to just blindly follow and be pessimistic about fighting for their own rights. But that's not everybody, not by a long stretch, even in Russia or in China. And they have expressed it and shown it, and had been brutally put down. And I think we should spare a thought for these people, and if you are inclined to pray for them and support them in whatever ways you can when those opportunities present themselves. I hate to write off a whole people just because perhaps a significant proportion tend not to be like-minded as we are, because I do believe that desire for freedom and willingness to fight for it is pretty universal.
Sorry, Michelle. I will go to Helsinki. I will tell you this, Ray. I understand your point of view. Truly, I do. And you are right in judging every person individually on what they do is what we should do. So we have had here in the space the other day, I think 2 days in a row, a really extraordinary Russian woman who fled Russia in 2008, I think, 7, 8, I don't remember exactly, but prior to the war, who is in Canada and who supports Ukraine from Canada, right? She has all my respect, all my full and entire respect. So judging individually, each individual in part, it's something that I do, and I think it's fair. But as a country, Russia invaded Ukraine, and we should not forget that the victim in the story is Ukraine. So, generally speaking, I don't have much I don't have much not understanding. Yeah, I don't have much understanding for neither for the people who flee Russia, as I said, neither for the people who don't fight within Russia. So my full approval and respect is for the people who are actually fighting inside Russia against what's happening there. So for the partisans who are helping Ukrainian who got deported inside Russia, they are helping them escape Russia and go outside Russia through Moscow or other avenues, and for the people who are by accident helping Russian depots hit the surroundings, and for such things, yes, they have my respect. For the rest of them, no. And for the ones who actually go into a war, no. My full respect, for example, was for a tank, for a Ukrainian tank member who got so he cornered a Russian soldier, right? And he jumped out of the tank, and the Russian soldier told to him not to kill him. And the Ukrainian told him, "I'm not like you. You will go to jail." That's my stance. You know, I won't inflict pain unnecessarily. But what's right is right, and why I come here every day is I don't have any Ukrainian. I don't even have any personal Ukrainian friends. I didn't had before this war. I didn't had any personal connection to Ukraine. For me to say I am doing this because I have friends there. No, I don't have friends. I don't have family there. And I do this because of my principles, and because I see what's right and what's wrong. And what Russia is doing is wrong. And this is why I wake up every morning at the ungodly hours and then sleep too little and juggle my life around this, because this is how I can help, or I think at least I can help at least raise awareness on what's happening in Ukraine, and keep the flame burning, right? So I will go to Helsinki and then back to you, Michelle. I'm sorry, I ranted a bit.
No, thanks, and I loved your rant, and I agree 110% what you said. This is the kind of Ukraine is the victim here, and whatever's happening inside Russia is beyond our control. And a couple of points I want to add is like I follow quite closely this kind of so-called liberal news channels like Medusa and Dozd and the others. They are a good source of info, but I still feel they don't cover enough what their country really is doing in Ukraine. I think it's so horrible what they are doing that they want to close their eyes, because they are this kind of elite big city, good family people who have had the best of their society. So they have, I think, difficulty stomaching that they have sunk so low as a people. So that's one point. And I want to point out also that the differences between Ukrainian and Russian societies, it was when the war started, I used to follow a lot this Russian-speaking Ukrainian journalist called Dmitry Gordon, and mostly in Russian. And Dmitry was interviewing one famous Ukrainian singer, and he was particularly famous in Russia because there's similar things, and he was popular in Russia anyway. And he said something what was striking. Just last spring, he said that there was these demonstrations against the war. You remember when the war started, there was this couple of demonstrations which were cracked down hard in big cities. And then I think somewhere in Moscow, in big city, there was even young children were detained and put in the Rosguardia bus. And then there was photos of these 9-year-olds, 12-year-olds being detained in an adult detention bus. This horrible Rosguardia people were dragging these children there. And this Ukrainian singer said that this will never happen in Ukraine. Never, never, never. If we see children taken care by authorities this way, there will be thousands, tens of thousands of people protesting in the street. But Russia, particularly, they say that, oh, we love children and, babushka giving candy for children. But no, nothing. Complete outrage. You take children. Imagine how they are scared being this horrible Nazi bus in Moscow or whatever. And what the Russians do? Nothing. They didn't do absolutely nothing. So this tells you what is the kind of national attitudes between Russians and Ukrainians. Ukrainians, they care, and if they feel that their rights are being violated, they are in the town square immediately. You see this in Kherson also. They were facing the Russian orcs with the bare hands there, resisting them. So they are passive, like a slave mentality people. I'm sorry to say. And if you think that this kind of some of lone protester with the white kind of meek protest is presenting somehow Russian majority. No, he's just presenting himself. They are just so tiny minority, these opposition people. Nobody cares about them, and people look down on them, that these people are stupid. They are just end up in jail, and never. The mentality is that nothing will ever change, and everything comes from the Tsar. So difficult to change this kind of slave mentality, I'm sorry to say. I follow Russia 40 years, 40 goddamn years I follow these events, and nothing changed, nothing, I'm sorry.
No need to apologize at all, Helsinki. I think what makes this space really special, I know I've said this many times, but really special and unique, is that we have voices from all over the world, from different backgrounds, different cultures, different religious beliefs, different political beliefs, and yet we're all here for one common goal. And Anna said it so eloquently when she said that it's about morality and what's good and what's wrong. And that's why the majority of us, if not all of us, are here, is because we believe in the goodness. And I loved hearing Anna's perspective, and Helsinki, yours as well, because obviously for myself growing up in Canada, we grew up just knowing that we had the freedoms and the liberties and that we had freedom of choice and speech and everything else. And so for me, I didn't even know anyone in the military until more recently, and it hasn't been a big part of my upbringing because it didn't have to be, and that's the difference. And so hearing Anda speak, coming from Romania, gives me like such a different perspective, as well as other people that are in this space as well. And I think that's what's so important, is for us to all be able to have these discussions. And we might have various varying opinions and thoughts, and yet that's okay. That's what it's good to be able to go back and forth and maybe disagree on things. So I wanted to share that, and I wanted to say thank you so much to Ray, Helsinki, and for providing your thoughts on this, because it's a really important topic.
And thank you, Michelle. I told you it's a pleasure to co-host with you, so you already know that part. All right. You told me that you have a story for me. What story do you have for me? I love stories.
I do. So I have it's a really sweet feel good story. So I know a lot of times we hear quite a bit of heaviness, and everybody loves the tanks and all the military talk. I also love hearing these really sweet stories. So this one is from a small village in eastern Ukraine called Hontarivka. Hopefully, I pronounced that right. And it was a region that was occupied by Russia at the very start of the school year, so back in September. And then a few weeks later, there was a Ukrainian counteroffensive which recaptured the area, which is amazing. But because there was so much uncertainty, the school there was still remote learning, which was really difficult for a lot of the students to manage because there was obviously damage to some of the power grids, which were across the entire country. So these three boys were wandering a hill in the village, and because they hadn't been to school, but school and education was so important to them, that they were set on building a place where they could shelter from the weather and were able to connect to the internet, to connect with their teacher online. And so how they did that was they made a makeshift hut out of sand, rope, plastic sheeting, and some tree stumps. And they were able to get like a very low cell phone signal, and they were able to connect with their teacher. So sometimes they would sit there for hours, and but one of the little boys said, but other times it was just too cold to stay there for too long. And their school director had shared this with Reuters, so it was published there or reported there, that she was just in such awe of the children's desire to learn, and that it was clear that a lot of these kids really missed attending school, which I know for me, I probably would have not missed attending school when I was young. However, these kids are just so keen on learning. So they were able to send in their homework via this cell phone signal, and they were able to communicate with their teacher. So I just thought it was such a cool story, and just a really nice feel good story, that I was pretty impressed with these kids, that just how important education was for them. So basically, they just used a piece of plastic, wood, and a mobile connection, and they were able to study and still continue with their education. So I wanted to share that with the group.
I think that's lovely. It speaks as we I don't know how to say this. We sometimes take for granted, right? Some rights we have, or the family we have, or the friends around us. They are just there. Our rights are just there, right? So the ability to learn, not the ability, but the opportunity, the is always available there for you. Access to internet, parents who make you go to school when you you say, I 10 more minutes. Let me sleep for 10 more minutes. You know, I just to postpone or avoid for 10 more minutes to go to work. Let's say, right? Later you will say to go to work, but actually when you don't have it, or you realize that it's not for granted, it's something that you it's something that others want for you. When you grow up, you realize it's something that others want for you. It was fought for. But as a kid, you're like, oh, okay, do I really need to do that, Mom? So I think it's indeed really sweet to see them eager to learn and to realize they need this in the future, right?
Absolutely. It's education. I believe that's the key of changing and making a difference in the world, I guess. And not every child unfortunately has the opportunity to have education or to go to school. And I think us in North America, we've been really fortunate. Well, probably because it's mandatory, so we have to go. I don't know if I would have gone if I didn't have to go. However, that's the privilege that a lot of us have growing up in certain countries. And I just love how these kids, like to your point, Anda, there's that external motivation of sometimes having someone tell you you have to do it, and these kids like intrinsically decided for themselves that education, I don't even know how old they were, but they decided for themselves at such a young age how important education was, that they were going to go above and beyond to be able to get that as in any way that they could.
100%. 100%. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, should we go to a hand? We have David who has his hand up. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, hi. Just to speak to this point a bit, and I spoke to Andrew about it a little bit on when was that? Saturday, I think. This does have some kind of fundamental philosophical basis, right? So Helsinki was talking about the slave mentality of the Russians compared to the agency felt by people in Ukraine. And this is from my perspective. Again, this is my perspective on things. I mean, I also share frustration with Helsinki in that I've got it's scary to say it, but also 35 year experience of dealing with Russians and Ukrainians and Belarusians, as well as a lot of people. So I'm quite an international person. The point I'm trying to make is that this desire for education is present both in Russia and in Ukraine, and you know, it's one of the few positive sides, I would say, of communism and Marxism, is that the countries that have implemented those solutions have always held education up to be an important part of things. But what's changed is this shift from Marxism to what we have in the West as a, you know, basically cutting edge philosophy. And what I mean by this is that with Marxism, the scientific method is perverted and held up to be religiously true, right? The absolute truth. So the concept with Marxism is that you have a human being that has the power to decide what's right and dictate what's right, and that's an absolute truth. and the absolute truth in this sense is Marxism, right? So that's kind of the starting principle in Marxism. Now, in the West, basically in the 20s, Bertrand Russell, from a philosophical perspective, had worked out that this was basically a load of old cobblers, and human beings weren't really sufficiently omnipotent to be able to dictate to everybody else what's right and what's wrong. And so in the West, we've already got this system whereby there are certain parts of the picture which are true 100%, and then the rest of it is basically we don't really know yet, but we kind of think it's in this direction. And there's another philosopher called Karl Popper who basically explains this in much better detail. And he says basically the scientific method is like this. Science doesn't tell you what is, it tells you what isn't. So there are very few things that make it to the status of a law in the scientific method. Most things are still a theory. So things that we regard as being true and universal, like the theory of evolution, remain a theory. There are very few laws. So there's things like the first law and the second law of thermodynamics, where very fundamental physical laws. You're really struggling to think about what else is a law, and the scientific method says basically, this is basically what you get. You get a situation which says there are very few things which are certain, and the rest of it we're kind of making up as we go along, and we have to live with that and do the best we can. And that's kind of a struggle. There's kind of a struggle to put that across as a coherent philosophy that you can teach in schools, right? But we do it, and we're successful at it, and that's something which Ukrainians have somehow always known, and there are deep cultural and historical reasons for it. I'll stop there. It's a big topic, but it's a big topic. But let's say there are basically three forks in the road of the development of the post-Soviet state, and some of those forks happened before the Soviet Union. In the case of Ukraine, that's basically the Polish and Lithuanian Commonwealth, and prior to that, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, as opposed to the Golden Horde and the state of Muscovy. In the case of Russia, so there's a 500-year part of history which is different for Ukraine and Belarus when compared to Muscovy. And the second thing is there's a third thing as well, but I can't remember what that is off the top of my head at this point. But the second thing is post-communist experience in Ukraine and Russia is so different. So it started in a similar way basically in the early 90s, but then progressed into kind of a gradual evolution of the free market capitalist system, and Russia's went the other way. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They went the other way. One went on one direction, and the other went in an entirely different direction. David, let's go to Ray and see. I think he wants to add to what to your point, and then we can come back on this.
Yeah, thanks, and I'll try to be brief. And I think there's always been this this autocratic bent in some countries, and I would include China and and Russia, and this whole concept of thinking that the state is above everybody else and the greater good is more important than the individual good has been sort of drummed into, I think, both cultures, and this sense of so-called, I guess, patriotism, which kind of goes, there's this one orthodoxy that everyone should accept. That seems to still dominates in both China and Russia. And as Helsinki had pointed out, that there is a lot of people are taught from the very beginning that individual expressions could lead to chaos, and that seems to have been the driving force behind forcing everybody to conform. And I think until there is the opportunity for for a couple of generations to actually experience the actual freedom of not being arrested for saying what what you really mean, then I don't think things will change very much in these countries. People get conditioned, and I think it was very easy because things were chaotic that people look to a strong leader, but unfortunately, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and I think that's pretty much what we saw in Russia, as Anders said, when they went in a different direction, unfortunately.
David?
Yeah, so this is I think the kernel of the point, right? So if you were in Ukraine, and I'd say pretty much universally, the experience of collapse of communism was a traumatic one. So whereas in the West, perhaps with the exception of the far west of Ukraine, but the certainties were thrown in the air. So it was really chaotic. It was a really chaotic time between let's say 1989 and 1995. It was real chaos pretty much everywhere. I always think of it as being kind of a, what do you call it, baptism in fire for many. So that people were kind of thrown in the water and forced to swim at that point. And as we said before, the slave mentality on the Russian side kind of prevailed in the end, whereas the thinking on your feet, making things up as you go along, doing the best you can, but knowing that you might have to change tomorrow, is basically the lesson that Ukraine learned in that period. And the speaker before, sorry, I didn't catch the name. The speaker before was saying that somehow there's a autocratic bent in certain parts of the world, and you would include Russia and China in that. And I would say that that's the main question in the geopolitical, if you want, philosophical debate about what values should prevail in the world. What does the rule-based order mean? Why is it that China and Russia just don't get this? Why haven't they progressed from a Marxist-based idea that the state is a thing that man has created and is absolutely true? And there are reasons for that, right? So, I mean, in the case of Ukraine, as I mentioned before, there are historical reasons, and history has a long arm. So let's say there are two parts to this in the case of Ukraine, which is that the period of absolute authoritarianism in Ukraine is only really applicable for the 75 years of the communist state, the the Soviet Union, and prior to that, in the period of Russian imperial occupation, which is also a fairly limited period compared to the rest of time. You know, I think we're talking something like a comparison of 200 years to 500 years of being in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which were totally different political cultures compared to Muscovy or the Golden Horde. And yes, so that's the point. And I think the difficult we were talking about education right at the beginning, and you know what we haven't managed to do in our education system post the end of the Cold War. So the end of the Cold War, from my point of view, was basically the victory of, let's say, Bertrand Russell and Karl Popper's philosophy over Marxism. But the fact of the matter is, we didn't claim a victory. You know, you can say maybe a weakness of our system is that we love plurality. It's very difficult for us to say, you know, this is definitely wrong. But in this particular case, you know, we can see very clearly what hundreds of years of authoritarian rule, so basically the concentration of power in few hands, does. And in that way, you end up with a system like Russia or China, which you know, drives tanks over protesters in Tiananmen Square, and which invades neighbors in the case of Russia. And you know, that's the problem we have from a geopolitical point of view, is, you know, how do we embolden the Western philosophy, which essentially says we don't know the answers, we're still working them out, guys. It's kind of a hard message to sell, but it has to be done. And this is kind of what needs to happen in the education system, is that, well, this is my perspective, right? So you know, I'm in this space as well for pluralism and for people putting their ideas forward more than anything else, because I might be wrong. So I need to test that every day. But what I think needs to change really is that we need to be able to teach in schools that this is why we are, and there are damn good reasons why we are, because this is what happens. Namely, Marxism is a mistake, and the countries that have implemented that right now are in front of us. That's Russia and China. And if we want to avoid going down that road, we have to be big and strong enough and ugly enough to admit that we don't know all of the answers, and we never will. We have to find these things out, and we have to adapt all the time.
Thanks so much, David. We're going to go to Ray, but but even after, I just wanted to get both of your opinions of just where do we go from here then with Russia? So you can think about it. We're going to go to Ray first, and then if either of you have any comments on that one, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think historically we had the end of World War II, when there was a Marshall Plan where I guess a certain philosophy was imposed, that, you know, that authoritarianism was not acceptable, and that the rule of international law was established, that you should not be using warfare, invading other people to settle international disputes. And I think, short of having, you know, in that case, Germany being occupied by Allied forces and a certain philosophy imposed, but, you know, the Marshall Plan also provided the environment with the economy being supported, so that you don't have an underclass and discontentment with the political system, being disenfranchised, etc., so that you promote this sense of agency in order that you would have a society that treasure these things and treasure the plurality of opinions and rule of law as well as as well as democracy. And just to say that, yeah, I don't think any of us know what is the solution with Russia. Unfortunately, unless you have an occupation force and to force that rule on a country, it's very hard to change this as David had pointed out. This ingrained thing that had been there for uh, generations and if not hundreds of years. So I think geopolitically, probably from the demographics collapse of Russia, that you could very easily see if this after this war, as they would almost certainly fail, that the federation might break up. All those minorities in resource-rich places like Yakuts and other parts of Siberia and also the Caucasus, where the Chechens are not facing the same demographics problem. Once the central authority loses credibility and frankly, power from all the losses from the war, you might actually see the federation break up. And we don't know the answers, and far from any wishful thinking of us being able to impose like a more sort of internationally friendly values, like for the rule-based society. I'm not very optimistic that could be done. But I think what we need to pay attention to is how we mitigate the damage from potential chaos, if that is possible. Yeah, just my thoughts.
Thanks so much, Ray. David?
Yeah, so there are two points I wanted to make, and the first one's not in line with what you asked the question, and I think the question is basically, what we do with Russia, and how we position ourselves after in the post-war settlement, and I'll come to that in a second. But there's one thing that I wanted to say, which is very, very important, which is how we deal with this ingrained tendency towards authoritarianism and racism, basically. So there is a big danger here to say that Russians or Chinese are essentially an authoritarian culture, or Iranians or Arabs for that matter are essentially authoritarian culture, and there's something in there which can never be changed, right? And this is a fallacy, and it's an important fallacy for us to be very wary of, because basically you're dehumanizing people in that way. And what's important for us to recognize is that these are still human beings, and they react the way they do for reasons that we know and understand. And we saw that happen in the rise of fascism in the 20s and 30s, and we saw it as well in communism, and that's really what we've got to fight. So to come back to what we do with Russia at this point, there are a couple of kind of historical thought experiments which I think are interesting and maybe instructive in some sense in this. But first of all, let me say, push back and don't hesitate to jump in if you think I'm going down the wrong track, right? So I mean, we had the end of the Cold War. Basically, as I said before, that was essentially a victory for this, the philosophy that's on our side of history, if you like. And there are two books that came out on that time, and I'd say these are the two kind of main strands of political thought at the time. There's Francis Fukuyama, who came out with a book called well, many papers as well, I expect, called The End of History, which was basically the liberal the liberal democratic view was the one that prevailed after the post-Cold War period, and everything was going to be hunky-dory. And the other book was called The Clash of Civilizations and the I can't remember the full title, sorry. The Clash of Civilizations and the Founding of the New World Order, or something like that, by a guy called Samuel P. Huntington. And his vision of the world was much more Hobbesian, in that he basically said that the world would split up into 3 or 4 culturally divided groups. The Western group, in which we include, by the way, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, in this collective West concept. And then you have Chinese sphere of influence, basically, and the Russian sphere of influence, and the Islamic world. And each of these 3 cultural blocks, or 4 cultural blocks, will kind of form the basis of geopolitics moving forward. And sadly it's the latter view of history which is, whilst not being completely true, let's say it turns out that this one's slightly more valid than Francis Fukuyama's End of History. And so the thing was mentioned about the post-war settlement, post-World War II. So two things I want to say about that. So the first thing is that kind of exactly, that's exactly my point. What we do post-war with Russia is kind of critical, and that would, if we carried on that thread of conversation, which I'd like to do next, then that's kind of the question. What do we do with Russia post-war? Assuming that there is such a thing as post-war. But the other thing is to do the thought experiment. What would have happened if, instead of at the end of the Cold War, we decided to more or less let the post-communist world sort itself out? All right, we did do some things. There was significant aid packages, there were advisors in these countries, but there was no hard imposition and no forced reconstructing of the political system, which is basically what we know from experience now, in my view, is what was required. So in the case of Japan and Germany, we have kind of quite clear examples that it is possible to build the kinds of states which are peaceful and obey the rule of law, and thrive in the pluralism and encourage the pluralism, but still have their own cultural identity, and they're not part of an imperial project in the sense that America's forcing things on them, rather the opposite. America's really laid back and saying, guys, just get on with it and sort yourselves out. So what would happen if we did a situation at the end of the Cold War when we completely had an invasive approach with the former Soviet Union, and really started to dictate things, and probably, in my opinion, there's a chance that we could have ended up in the right way, but these counterfactuals are always difficult. So I think everybody at the time was still unsure. I mean, it's the first time that there's been that kind of collapse of political structure in geopolitics, with the exception of events like the end of the Second World War. So we were still in this phase of working out what to go on, what to do. And the second thing is, I'm not sure that Russia would have accepted it. I think all of us wanted Russia to evolve in a different way than it has done, but it's it is what it is, and we are where we are. It's quite interesting to think about if there was a Marshall Plan and the invasive kind of dictation of how Russia should develop in the immediate post-communist phase, but it didn't happen, and it probably didn't happen because it wasn't possible for it to happen at the time. But it's still quite interesting to think about that as a possibility, and it's interesting to think about in the sense that it can inform the question here. So, what do we do with Russia in a post-war settlement now? I'm kind of inclined to make a pause here.
David.
Yeah.
So let me break your train of thought.
Yeah.
I love how you're thinking. I have to break a bit your train of thought, and push back, because you know I told you I always push back. So one of the things that I found is I found this, how should I put this? I found it as a great parallel between Russia and my country, was the fact that corruption was one of the things that emerged after switching from full communism to capitalism. So people in general, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, took this opportunity, opportunity of freedom to great extent, and it was something sort of a wild west. But in terms of economy and in terms of corruption, and this is because you abolish the old laws. You determine that old laws are no good, and you want new ones. And usually it's like, after fasting, when you go to the feast and you basically binge on it, it's the same thing. So usually you go all the way on the other side of the spectrum, and everyone goes wild. And I think two or three things actually made a difference for my country and for other countries which breaked from communism, and as opposed to Russia. So the three things are, one, internal moral fiber. So I don't know how to
Yeah, that's absolutely, but that's a culturally something that's grown up in your culture for a long time. So Romania, correct me if I'm wrong, but was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that was an empire, but it was still fairly diverse.
Not all of it. So Romania has four major regions. Let's say three, if you want. And only one of them was under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and only for a couple of 100 years. And we hate them for it. Let me put it this way: they had a good they had a good influence, indeed. The work ethics in that area, and there is a change, so you can see a difference in that area as opposed to other areas of Romania. But I was also thinking at Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. I was also thinking at Poland, right, which also had Russian influence. So all of these countries actually fought back. One of the reasons behind fighting back and changing in a good way um, um, after communism was their moral fiber. So that was one. The second one was the fact that um, all of them or some of them on various degrees fought back corruption. So actually Romania changed for the better the moment there was actually an executive decision, let's say it this way. So it started from the head down, to have an organism, an independent organism, which actually fought great corruption. So this was a signal from the top to the bottom that something needs to be changed in the society. And similar things had happened in other countries. And this is actually what pushed forward not only the society, but encouraged foreign investments in the country and encouraged the economy. So this would be the second. And third, legislation. So you have to put in place legislation which um, helps and protects the individual property, the individual speech, the ability to speak. For me, it's really important because I know how it is not to have it. And also punishes all deviations from this. So I think this would be the three things which actually, so you in Ukraine, you had the revolution of dignity. So that was their moral fiber saying, enough, it's enough, right? Enough, it's enough. We are done with this shit. I'm sorry, with this doo-doo, which is bad. We don't like it. So we will ditch on it, right? We will choose something else for ourselves. And the fact that they were able to do that, it's a very good note on their character as a nation, as moral fiber of the nation.
Yeah, there are a couple of points I'd like to come back on that, but we've got another hand, so let's maybe go to Rebecca.
Yes, yes, perfect. We will go to Rebecca and then we come back.
Hold on one sec, Rebecca. I just wanted to say my goodbyes before you speak and thank Anda and, of course, Alan earlier on for co-hosting with me. And it's been a pleasure being with all of you tonight. And thank you so much for being here. We really, really, really appreciate all of you being here. We're so grateful for all of our listeners, our speakers, and our co-hosts. We wouldn't be able to run the space 24/7 without all the volunteers such as Anda and Mockers who spend a lot of their time here. And so I'm really grateful for them because I can't always be here all the time. And so it's great that we're getting the wisdom from all of them and including Ryan too. So thanks so much. And Mockers and I are going to do a co-host trade. So you're going to continue with Girls Night tonight and I'll see everyone later.
And thank you, Michelle, for always being there to pick up the ball and not letting it drop. So it really matters, and we are really happy to have you here.
Thank you, Michelle.
So, Rebecca.
Hi. Yes, I was actually just going to contribute some things to the discussion of America's role in Russia in the 1990s because I actually saw this happen, but from the sort of from the other end. Because at the time I was a graduate student at the Harvard Economics Department, and the USAID, which was the U.S. body that was trying to help transition the Russian economy, had a large number of professors from Harvard and MIT, and they would go to Russia and then they'd come back, or they'd go to Germany or Poland, and then they'd come back and they'd give seminars, and we'd all go and listen and try to figure out, it was a very, I mean, everyone, and what I want, the the way it looked from watching it from my end was all of the problems that came out, everyone was completely aware of. It's not as if they went in and they thought, wow, we'll just hand the companies over to the oligarchs and they're just great people. But there were always trade offs and a sense that time was limited. So, just to give you one sense of what's going on, you have these immense manufacturing and industrial firms which are owned by the government, but the government has, in some sense, ceased to exist, and so they're in the hands of their management, who will be the future oligarchs. But the management don't own them. And what the management were doing, the apparatchiks who were running these immense industrial firms that had no owners, is they were just stealing them blind. I mean, they were literally disassembling the factories and selling them. So the fear was that if you didn't sell the firms quickly, and yes, you knew you were going to sell them in corrupt sales, probably to their own management, but at least then the management would stop actually disassembling them. And they were very important because so many of the functions of what we think of as in the US, and I assume in much of the rest of the West, as being carried out by local governments, were actually the responsibilities of these firms. That so many of the social services came through your workplace rather than through your local government. And so as the firms literally were melting under the weight of the theft that was occurring because they didn't belong to anyone, the entire social fabric of many of the non metropolitan parts of Russia were literally crumbling. And there was this real sense of just panic that you needed to do something to stabilize the situation, even if you knew what you were doing was far from optimal. And that kind of decision was being made over and over again. I mean, I remember one seminar going and the speaker explaining that because so many of the firms had industrial technology and processes that were so out of date and needed so much investment, that the value of the raw materials that Russia produced, everything from wheat to oil that went into Russia's manufacturing sector, was worth more than the output that came out because the output was so old fashioned and of such poor quality and so badly, they made the wrong things, they hadn't realigned for the market, so that most of the Russian economy was actually detracting from the value of the underlying resources. But at the same time, if you just closed all these firms, the unemployment would be almost unimaginable. And these were so the forces that led to the 90s being horrible were not a system that was basically working and the capitalists came in and messed it up. This is a system that was so dysfunctional that the country had literally collapsed in on itself, and fixing it was impossible. And maybe you could have said, well, this decision different, that maybe this way, but every single decision had these horrible trade-offs, and people were completely aware of them, and were just trying to figure out a pathway that would have the least immiseration possible, the least suffering possible. It was not a matter of people going in and saying, wow, it's the Wild West, we can recreate capitalism. I mean, it was kind of horrifying and fascinating. And it was you know, to, to sort of, I never myself went to Europe. I did not work for USAID. So all of this was just having people come back and talk about it. But you got the sense of an almost Sisyphean task, and that's all I wanted to say about it.
Thank you, Rebecca. Actually, you are very correct, and this is one of the reasons for which I always stressed that the strength of the West, as we name it, right, the strength of the capitalist society is private property, because private property comes with accountability, comes with initiative and comes with drive. So when it's yours, you will, if you don't take care of it, you are the only one suffering, right? They didn't own it. So if they didn't own it, they were not suffering for stealing from it. If you own it, if it's yours, you will take care of it. If it's your firm and you give it to someone to run it for you, like a manager or something, and you see that the numbers are, the production is up, but the numbers are down, the sales are down, you start asking yourself what's going on, where did I did wrong, how this went so wrong, where could I improve, and so on. So you are seeking actively how to improve what you have in order to get the results that you want, which is the drive I mentioned. And this drive gets you the initiative. You look out for opportunities. You look out for options, and this is the beauty, actually, of the private property, um, um, which is totally absent in
A planned economy.
in a planned economy. Exactly. When the firm is not yours, you only have to fall back on your principles, and if you don't have them, well, it's it's bad, right? In a capitalist society, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but I say what I'm saying is that it can regulate itself a bit, just like, let's say, like nature, right? You can abuse it, but if you let it regulate itself, and if you take care of it with laws, it can actually be a much better place for everyone, because how should I put this? It's in a free market, where you have laws that prevent people with low levels of principles to do bad things, but encourage initiative and encourage a pushback. You usually have a thriving society. I have hands, which is something I love every morning. So you actually make my day. Thank you for coming up and being here. And actually, I enjoyed this morning and this morning discussion. I will go first to David, which was gallant to let others speak too, and then to Ray. David?
Yeah, so we're into a big topic, right? So I think we need to kind of try and break it down into certain sections. The first thing, I guess, the first thing is, you mentioned private property being a key thing, and of course it is. But yeah, let's go back to the situation in 1990 and kind of the Wild East, if you like. You mentioned, there's a certain kind of moral fiber to countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and as I mentioned before, there are two things there basically. There's a long arm of history, if you like, but there's also it's important to say a degree to which the European Union was open to them with open arms in a way that it definitely wasn't for Russia at that point in time. So the question of having the rules, the rule book was kind of already written to a certain extent, and it was a question of whether you wanted to adopt that rule book or not. And if you wanted to adopt that rule book, you were pro entering the European Union, and if you didn't, then you were against it. And we still within Europe have that debate going on, and Brexit is a witness to that. Now Brexit was also a subject of a different rabbit hole that I don't really want to get involved in now, which is Russian disinformation. But
Which I don't want to go into Brexit either, because it always stirs up a whole of other discussions, and we get away from the topic. Okay.
Exactly. But the point was that in Europe we're still big enough and strong enough to have this debate whether the European Union is the best thing or not. That was the only point. In the Wild West and the situation with property, in the Wild East and the situation with property in the immediate post-communist period, as you said, this was a chaotic, and I used the phrase baptism of fire in the last section. There's a lot of detail there to go into about how the systems transitioned and what it was like. But to kind of sum it up in as short a time as possible, the situation in Russia and in Ukraine at the same time was basically a system where you had a system that had completely collapsed, and there was nothing in its place initially. So basically, capitalism existed, but it existed only in a strictly speaking, illegal manner. So the market had always existed in the Soviet Union. Managers of companies had always stolen. So the principle of working in a criminal way was ingrained in the system for the previous 70 years. And the fact that you couldn't operate a business legally. So that's kind of just, and you couldn't operate a business legally because no one enforced the legislation to make it legal to run a business. So there were, basically you ended up with a situation where mafias rose because they kind of filled the gap. They fill the gap anywhere where there's a lack of a viable rule of law, and this is exactly what happened. And to a certain extent, the communist system was a mafia as well. But what happened in the post-Soviet period was that the power of the mafias moved down to organized crime network, and the organized crime network basically owned the government. And that's what Vladimir Putin changed. And what's changed in Ukraine and the rest of Soviet satellite states, with the exception of Belarus, not going into Central Asia for this because it's another ball game. But what happened there was that there was a gradual ability to grow those things internally in Ukraine, and the acceptation, and basically the decision to take on the European Union's rule book because it's kind of a best practice principle. So yeah, that's what happened. That's what happened.